PH1 was continued from our council September 1st, 2020 meeting, and the ordinance reads, ordinance amending the official zoning maps of the city to rezone property containing 10.45 acres of land located at 111 Warehouse Lane and 3804 Market Street from CS Commercial Services District to MFMHCD Multifamily Medium High Density Conditional District for 192 unit residential development. At this time, we'll also note that whoever makes the motion must read a consistent statement for the record. This time, I'd like to recognize the city manager, Mr. Cheatham. Mr. Cheatham.
Technical problem with the microphone, Mr. Mayor. Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. Mr. Brian Chambers will present this item. Thank you.
Yes, good evening, Council. This item was continued from last week to allow the time for the applicant and the adjacent owners to come to terms on the improvements that were being proposed. Just a quick recap and update. This site is located on the west side of West Sig Road, south of Market Street, east of Cinema Drive. It's approximately 10.5 acres in size. The applicant proposes to rezone the property from CS Commercial Services to MFMH for 192 unit residential development. This proposal includes the improvement and dedication of Wetzig Road from the property boundary to Market Street, and the applicant is also proposing a right-of-way connection to Cinema Drive. This is the site plan that you saw last week. Since that time, the applicant has modified their preliminary plan, and they've moved that right-of-way down 30 feet away from the adjacent property owner. I have been in touch with the chair of the SRB, and they would consider that, the subdivision review board would consider that a minor modification, so it would not need to go back to SRB for this change. I also want to go over the, last time we had representatives here from the Cinema Drive Office Park. This is their approved plan, and their concern is that future building and whether they'd be able to build it as proposed. We've spoken with staff in zoning and the city attorney's office, and we believe this site plan is vested. So they would be able to build this regardless of whether Wetzig becomes a public dedicated right-of-way or not. There's also a provision of our code that says that there's a public right-of-way conveyed that impacts setbacks. So long as they meet 75% of that requirement, they would not be considered non-conforming. So based on the movement of the right-of-way and then those provisions of the code, there's minimal impact on this property, the future development of this property. Staff, we really don't have any other further comments at this time or any updates. We do recommend a conditional approval. The applicant is here with a presentation as well, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions, Mr. Chambers? Mr.
Yes,
Brady?
sir.
Am I on? Okay, good. I think this up. There was one other issue I thought about, the sufficiency of parking for tenants.
Correct.
Has that been discussed?
Right now, there's nothing specific in the ordinance for a condition on parking. Right now, they would be held to the minimum requirements. Although the land development code for the parking does allow for them to apply for an alternative parking plan that's reviewed and approved by the technical review committee. So that would have to be submitted to the review committee to get a reduced parking amount. But there's nothing specific in the ordinance that addresses that right now.
I thought the problem was the neighbors were concerned that they didn't have enough parking and that people would be parking on the roads.
Correct.
So that's still an open issue.
The applicant has not changed the proposed number of parking spaces at this time.
Okay.
Council member, I will note to you that if you look at condition 5 in the proposed ordinance, that has been updated, and it actually would allow up to 80 additional parking spaces. That's not on the plan in front of you, but it is some flexibility that we have built in if council is so minded, so that the 80 parking spaces could be allowed. And we even put in an ability for them, if you'll excuse the term, to wiggle the buildings just a little bit in order to accommodate that. If they were so minded, it wouldn't have to come back to council.
What did you say about the building?
Justin. Go ahead, John, explain again, please.
So part of the change to condition number 5 is it puts in 245 parking spaces as a minimum, but they could add up to 80 without coming back to council. And we would allow them to slightly move their structures up to 10 feet so that they could get in the parking spaces without having to take down a tree or that sort of thing. Sir.
So the neighbors are okay with the adjustment?
I can't speak for the neighbors. I've only been in contact with their attorney, just touching base as to what.
But I mean, the
what's being
attorney's
proposed.
okay.
As far as I know, they're here tonight, so they'll be able to speak to that more
All right.
clearly, so.
Thank you.
I think, Brian, in respect to Westic Drive, I guess there was some concerns about the amount of traffic that's coming in on that road because it's a commercial, there's a lot of, I guess, some commercial use in that particular property there. Will y'all be handling the improvement or as far as talking to the developer about Westic Drive in regards to street standards? Will y'all be talking about that at the SRB?
Yes, sir. This is gone to the subdivision review board, and they have approved a modified cross-section for that right-of-way. It's only 30 foot wide, so you can't fit your standard cross-section in that right-of-way. So it's basically reduced asphalt, curb and gutter on one side, and sidewalk on one side of the road.
But it is a city street, right?
It will be a city street, yes, sir.
And with the traffic that's going in and out of that property, I guess some commercial, I guess some landscaper and what have you that's back in the back, you're okay with the condition of the street with that kind of,
Yes, sir. We anticipate most of the traffic using that new Cinema Drive connection.
okay. Well, very good. Any other questions? Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. All right, at this time, I'd like to recognize the applicant.
Good evening. My name is Dave Spitrino, and I'll just give a quick recap. Since our last meeting, what I understood to be were the three main issues regarding our proposal. One was the alignment of the connector road that we're proposing. If you can go to slide 2 on the screen. And this is what we initially had, and I'll take the blame for this. I just was not picking up on the neighbor. It was the rear of their building, and I had the right of way going to the rear of their building. I didn't see a concern with that. When it was brought to my attention, we went to slide 2, next slide, please. We've pulled that road over top of the existing road where it is now, and that leaves us about 48 feet between the property line and the road. It seemed to be that that was the main concern. And as was reiterated to me, the concern of noise, but also proximity to their structures and also setbacks. So as being the main issue, we believe we've resolved that issue. And again, I apologize. I didn't really ask the question as to why the road was in the place initially. I thought it was a technical reason, and I like it better here as well. So this worked out, I think, as a win for everybody. The second, and Councilman O'Grady brought it up, we do not want to underpark our project. That is not our intent, but I'm more afraid of overparking than I am underparking. I can always pretty easily add more parking spaces. As mentioned, we have acres and acres of land that will not be developed. But if I need additional parking, I would much rather go and capture that additional parking when appropriate versus tearing out trees only to have parking spaces with no car there. We are completely fine having a range of parking. Again, I'm going to be aggressive in trying not to overpark the site, but at the same time, we will create places and locations so that in the event we need additional parking or if staff thinks we need additional parking, but as our interest in trying to preserve what is existing, there is no interest in clear cutting a site like this just so we can satisfy an arbitrary parking rule that doesn't necessarily directly apply to the type of users or residents in our homes. And then last, and I was glad to see this was resolved, was the potential for a non-conforming setback along Wetzig Road once it becomes public. I didn't see this either. It just didn't dawn on me. Wetzig has been there physically for many, many years, decades at this point. And to think that we were even approaching the potential of a taking of our neighbor's property, it's not something I would be willing to be comfortable with, and I certainly wouldn't ask my neighbor to be comfortable with that. So I appreciate the work of both staff and our city attorney in reassuring all parties that not only are they getting a street frontage at somebody else's expense on a city street for the potential future redevelopment at my cost, not theirs, But in the event that they want to do something differently or build to their existing setbacks, that they're protected to do so. So it's my understanding, and this is something we worked on diligently after our last council meeting up through the weekend, and I'm glad to answer any questions.
Yes, sir, Mr. Brady.
Dave, has the fire department seen this revised plan for the road?
Yes, it's my understanding that before the last council meeting, when we knew this was a potential issue, we sent the sketch that, if you recall, I had at the last meeting. We sent that over, and there was no, I don't think there was any heartburn when it was explained that it's the same exact spot that it is now. Again, we're of the belief that this is kind of a win as well for the fire department, and that they now have more connectivity in and around the community as well, especially with new homes and users truly in their back door.
Anybody else? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Petrino.
Thank you.
Since we left the public hearing open, I guess this time I'd like to welcome anybody that wants to speak for or against this project to come forward.
Thank you, and good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council. My name is Matt Nichols, and as you may recall, I represent the Cinema Drive Office Park Association. The relocation of Switchyard Lane is, we appreciate that. That is a good thing. I think it's now shown as 47.5 feet from my client's property line to the proposed edge of pavement. And that is a good thing. We appreciate that. I do appreciate the city attorney's office and discussions on the vested rights issue, as Mr. Chambers mentioned. So I think that we've clarified that issue. My client's engineer, Dan Dawson, is here and had a few points that he would like to make, and I'm not an engineer, so if it's acceptable to council, I was going to have Mr. Dawson make those points that are related to some of the engineering points for the council's consideration. Thank you.
Good evening, council. I'm Dan Dawson, professional engineer. Just to make sure I got this straight, we were thinking Mr. Nichols would not be able to be here tonight. And during the day, several of the HOA members that are engineers and surveyors pretty much went over and over what they want to make sure are covered. So that's what this plan presentation is about. As you know, tonight I'm representing the Cinema Drive Office Park. Several members of the HOA are also practicing engineers and surveyors. Between the three of us, we probably have over 100 years of experience in developing land in the city. Regardless of what your decisions are tonight, we strongly encourage the council to allow the city engineering staff to perform their work and provide the citizens with complete and proper application of the city standards by avoiding language that may cause the staff to think the council is willing to waive the city standards when they've not been addressed. The Cinema Drive Office Park is in favor of this applicant, his project on this site to provide affordable workforce housing and the connector road to Cinema Drive. However, the HOA is not in favor of the project as currently designed and is concerned that it is being rushed through a city approval process. Last Tuesday night, the applicant stated in his response to a question from Councilman Spears that the project has opponents who have said in private, off-the-record settings, they are against the project because, and this is verbatim, because they are worried about the people that might live here might not be the people I want to live here. We don't know who the opposition is or who would have said that, but we would suggest that the applicant address the concerns of this supportive neighbor instead of attempting to explain away potential deficiencies. At least 9 waivers of the city standards are required for the city council to approve this project as currently proposed. My client has requested explanations of the justifications for the waivers and has not received any response. In hallway discussions with the applicant during the last council meeting, the applicant agreed to shift the connector road toward the fire station. This addressed one of the setback problems, and we appreciate that. Okay, we're now ready to go to slide 2. We have 3 main areas of concern that remain. We're concerned about infrastructure deficiencies, traffic problems, and land use changes. All public streets should be constructed in accordance with the city standards with 50-foot right-of-ways and 25 feet from face of curb to face of curb. A standard public street should be constructed from Cinema Drive to the CSX Railroad right-of-way. The HOA is concerned that converting Wetzig driveway to a public street as proposed by the applicant will burden the taxpayers with having to maintain a less than standard street and later the cost to rebuild and widen it. Based on information submitted, the applicant is proposing to widen the existing 18-foot driveway 1 foot on each side and add a ribbon of concrete or border, a 1-foot border along the edges. The HOA is concerned that the street may end up being broomed off with some asphalt and concrete added along the edges and a burden to the city taxpayers because the city council granted the waiver. Instead of the waiver, the HOA would prefer the city council to encourage the city staff and TRC to work with the applicant to provide an adequate and cost-effective street cross-section and pavement structure. And you'll see there, slide 2. Now let's go to slide 3. Slide 3 represents the cross-section taken straight out of the applicant's application, showing about 20 to 21 feet from edge of pavement to edge of pavement. Next slide. Oh, we're getting there. Next slide. Other way. The other next slide. What's going on? Advance. There we go. And the standard street detail here shows curb and gutter on both sides, sidewalk, 60-foot right of way, et cetera. Next slide. Okay. We're worried about inadequate stormwater network. And it's unfortunate for the applicant in that, we call these infill projects, but quite frankly, they're remainder projects. They're the land remaining because nobody can figure out how to develop them. And I respect him and his capabilities and wish him well as he pursues it, but he's got some challenges. Stormwater is one of them. A member of the HOA observed the stormwater flooding across the top of Wetzig Drive in the past. The existing culvert under Wetzig Drive lacks the hydraulic capacity needed to convey the upstream runoff, and the outfall for the stormwater to drain from the applicant's property is restricted. That meaning not only is it restricted underneath Wetzig, but also when it attempts to leave the site across the railroad, it is restricted there also. Fortunately for the city fire station, it was constructed 3 feet above the Wetzig road elevation. And I think that was for a reason. Next slide. Oh, in these things, what basically you're seeing are the watersheds. The first one was the watershed to Wetzig Drive. The next one is the watershed down to the railroad track. There are large parcels of land And the recent DOT widening of Market and Carr Avenue altered that a little bit. We've met with DOT, or talked with DOT about that. They've shared their limits. So it's a big watershed. And I think if you'll look on there, you'll also see that the current pipe underneath Wet Sig and the current pipes underneath CSX are woefully inadequate to carry this water downstream. Next slide. This photograph is from 1956. If you get oriented, you'll see the curved railroad track, the triangle, the old fertilizer plant, and actually you can see Wet Sig Road. Then as you go up toward Goody Goody along the railroad track, or up toward Market along the railroad track, you'll see there's a drainage course that crossed the railroad track at that time. Well, next slide. It's not there anymore. I'm not sure how the water will get out of this. And it's very important because when you take all that runoff from the upstream area, apply it to this site, the only place it's got to go is up because there's virtually no outflow. And I think that's why the road has been overtopped before. So again, back to, we have concerns. We want it to work, but at the same time, we really want the council and the staff to really look at these things carefully so we don't have long-term problems. Next slide. Okay, traffic problems. I told you there were three. The three are infrastructure deficiencies, traffic problems, and land use changes. On traffic problems, continuing to connect to Wet Sig to Market will create and creates a traffic cut through that we do not desire to have. As proposed, a traffic cut through will be created from Market Street to Carr Avenue via Wet Sig and the new connector road, which will allow drivers to avoid 3 stoplights. The Wet Sig driveway from Mintz Plumbing to the right-of-way of Market should be closed and used by O'Reilly's, Mintz Plumbing, and Kyoto, formerly the Wendy's restaurant. Next slide. We also looked at, because we heard once we started having questions, instead of dealing with issues, we were presented more challenges. A new challenge we received on Friday was, now the fire chief wants this road, this connector to Market, to remain open. Even though it's 20 feet wide, I wouldn't put a $300,000 firefighting apparatus on it and risk it being damaged. But we want to use that. They wanted to keep that open. This illustration basically shows you that there are 4 properties that would benefit from this drive remaining open. And the alternative for fire response is to simply go to the new center, Market Street traffic, as I'm sure they do half the time, and the other half the time they're going to Carr Avenue, make a left, go down a half a block to Barclay, make a U-turn, and they are in front of the 4 parcels. So whereas we totally respect the fire department, and we know their response time is great, we sort of disagree at this point about the true need to keep this 20-foot wide driveway open for the fire department. Next slide. The immediate and future access to fertile ground. Fertile ground, which is not the applicant, owns the 30-foot driveway strip from Market to the 3 acres of industrial property bounded by CSX tracks. The property bounded by the tracks has probably been identified as a future hub for the proposed light rail system. As a hub, uses that could be foreseen in the future are park and ride, park and get on the transit, offices, more apartments, restaurants, etc. Definitely uses that are going to need more than a 20-foot wide driveway called a city street. All of these future uses of this property will require more than a 22-foot wide and 30-foot wide right-of-way street. The existing traffic to the industrial property needs a standard city street. To avoid the city having to purchase or condemn sufficient land for the remaining needed right-of-way, and then to construct a proper road in the future, the HOA feels a standard public street should be constructed from Cinema Drive to the CSX Railroad right-of-way, as shown here. And what you see there are private driveways from the Cinema to CSX track road, private drive to buildings 1 and 2. That eliminates the setback problems over there behind the building, because you have no public right-of-way anymore. You have a private piece of property with an apartment complex. You bring it down to the railroad track, you have 2 driveways there. This plan we developed actually shows a turnaround there. The current plan has no turnaround. Can you imagine bringing a fire truck down the street, get to the building, drive in, and then have to back all the way out? Next slide. I'm about to finish. Land use changes. Changes in the HOA rear setback requirements. One of the owners asked me to add one more thing, and I apologize, I didn't have it in the notes. Back on the street right-of-way improvements and so forth, we realize the city has decided this project did not need a traffic impact analysis. We don't know why, and we've been told certain things, but had it been the benefit of a traffic impact analysis, based on the experience of the parties, there would have been at least some determination as to whether additional length should be added to the left turn lane where Cinema Drive intersects Market Street. In other words, when you bring all this additional traffic, and some of them are going to turn left, if you don't make that left turn lane long enough, you're going to have people backing into the through lane or to the right turn lane. So we think, even though you didn't do a traffic impact analysis, that is something to be considered. So on the changes on the setback, I think we pretty much talked about that, but on this setback issue, this is not a zoning issue. This is also a distance from building to building. The current setback is 15 feet. The ordinance requires a front yard of 25 feet on the neighbor's property, on this property. The existing building is constructed 15 feet from the rear property line. The future building is proposed to be constructed is 2 feet from the 30-foot right-of-way. And so there will be issues back there. The attorney's already covered most of that, and I'm glad he was able to cover that. So I'm going to run on to the last slide now, slide number 16. And we're going to examine this area between the rear of the existing building, within that oval, that red oval. Actually, you see the 2 setback lines. The yellow is the current setback line. The green is the proposed setback line, if that's a dedicated street right-of-way. But the point on this one is the distance between, you'll see on the left side, there's a building number 2. That's a 55-high building proposed to have parking on the bottom and 4 stories above it. And they're going to have to start, if they like the fire station, they're going to have to start about 3 feet above the road elevation to even keep from getting wet. But nevertheless, that building horizontally in plan view is where it's located. And then my client's office or one of his buildings is across the street. And then if you'll go to the next slide, this is pretty much what it's going to look like. You see on the left side, and I'm no graphic artist, but I can attempt to make a sketch, and that's what this is. I used an arc to make sure you saw that 55 feet up and 55 feet out on a circle are the same. That's how I placed the 2 buildings. And then the day we were out there looking at it, the truck rode by, and that pretty much is a truck in the photo. But that will give you an idea of what your future street's going to be. And if you make it a public street,
Yes, sir. Mr. Anderson has a question here.
Mr. Dawson,
Dawson.
I'm curious, when that was zoned there, the office little park, is there enough, do you have enough parking to do the fourth building? Is that
An abundance of
good to
parking.
go?
Yes, sir. In fact, if you look, I believe the applicant had or maybe the staff had a good photograph of the site. That's a good point. And another good point is the applicant's road, connector road, is a 1 lane in, 1 lane out. The HOA's property has 3 lanes, an entrance lane, a left turn lane, and a right turn lane. And we strongly encourage that on that connector road with a potential for the future traffic, that the city consider requiring a left and right turn lane so that the traffic doesn't get backed up when Cinema Drive is busy and someone's trying to make a left turn.
Okay. Yes, sir, Mr. Spears.
My question is for staff about these 9 waivers. I'm interested in that. The 9 waivers that Mr. Dawson told.
Yes, sir, Mr. Spears. The waivers for this from the city's technical standards were applied for and granted by the subdivision review board. Anytime you have an improvement in a public right-of-way or a proposed public right-of-way, it's required to be reviewed and approved by our subdivision review board. So it's my understanding, and the city attorney can correct me, it's outside the purview of the council to grant those waivers. The code is set up in such a way that the subdivision review board would review and approve those waivers as the applicant requests them and as those public improvements are reviewed.
I guess my real question is, what are the 9 waivers? What are we actually, what are the 9 things that are being waived that, Mr. Dawson talks about that potentially makes this a problem?
I do not have that list in front of me. I can give you some examples of what those waivers are. It's going to be your standard city cross-section. Typical cross-section would have sidewalk on both sides, curb and gutter, and a width of asphalt. Wetzig only has a 30 foot, so you can't do but so much in 30 feet. So there's a waiver from providing curb on one side and sidewalk on one side and basically doing the other improvements on the property owner side of that right away. The length of that road, there's a bend in the connection. Well, there was a bend in the connection. I'm not sure you need that waiver anymore, but like the configuration of the road and then the horizontal curve radius, these are all engineering terms that I'm trying to explain to you, but it's difficult to get across. They're all technical standards for how you actually construct this improvement. So it's a lot of widths and lengths and tangent lengths and curve radii and those types of things that our engineering staff looks at. And I'm not in any manner able to kind of speak to those engineering terms because I'm not an engineer.
So, and you may not be able to answer this, but if those are the standards, why would we wait? I know you've heard and we've all heard about the traffic concerns all around town. So, I mean, I think that's kind of important.
Well, typically, it's due to the site constraints. Every site's going to be different. Every site's going to have different access concerns and accessibilities. When in this case, you've got a 30-foot right-of-way, so you've only got 30 feet to work with. So you're going to need a waiver from those standards. And our land development code and our technical standards anticipate that. I would say 90% of the projects that come through, there's some waiver in some form from the technical standards, and the subdivision review board takes those waivers into account, takes the site conditions into account, takes into account the peculiarity of the area, and then what could the applicant do to help alleviate any other safety concerns with those waivers as part of conditional approval. So, for instance, if they had a condition of the curve radii, the corner needed to be at 25 degrees as opposed to 35 degrees, they would put a condition on to say, well, you gotta have a larger sight distance triangle so you can see around the corner, that kind of thing.
Thank you.
Sanders.
And I feel like, I don't remember if it's you there or Dave last time that made this observation or not even observation, it's part of y'all's determination. If wet sig was the only way in and out, this probably wouldn't fly, right? I mean,
No, it would not.
Right. So the wet sig is just being kept for interconnectivity, as I understand it. It's assumed that most of this traffic is going to go in and out of Cinema because you can go right or left to a light. Is that, I mean, that's what I recall here. Is that?
Yes, sir.
what you're saying?
Yes.
So what the opposition here, they're proposing to close this road, I guess, as I saw it, just right here before this building, and make the road a 2 standard all the way to the back of the property. Is that? I was trying to follow all that. Is that what you got?
I was trying to follow too. This is the first I'm taking this in with you.
So that's what it appeared.
Right.
And that would, so you lose the interconnectivity piece, but he was saying you could still get to all the properties except the new property. So, I mean, that's, okay. All right. I guess my point is Wetzig is just being left for interconnect. It's not, you're not planning to be the major in and out.
It's not planned to be a major point of access. It would alleviate traffic to allow that right in, right out movement as opposed to going on Cinema. So you'll have options, which is what you want with interconnectivity, is to disperse the traffic the best you can.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Sir.
Explain to me the part where he said the fire truck would have to come in one way and then back out. Did you?
When you have a parking lot or a driveway off of a public road, it can only be 150 feet before you have to have a vehicle turn around to allow a fire truck to turn around and then leave the site. What he is pointing to, and I don't know if I can get to that slide or not, the rear building right now doesn't show that turnaround. It was a comment that was brought up in our pre-TRC meetings, but when it comes in for technical review, it's going to be a requirement. There's no way around that. The engineering staff the fire department can't allow that development to happen without that turnaround being put in. So it's not shown on the plan right now, but the project won't happen as it's shown on right now because that turnaround is required. And that was a comment at pre-TRC.
So it will be there.
It will be there.
Okay. And then the information he was sharing with us about like underground stuff, like the small, what do you call it? Where the water runs through. To
The drainage.
The drainage.
Drainage pipe.
Okay, now that's just, and as I was hearing him, I thought I heard him say that's something that just is not big enough. Is that true, or is that?
I can't answer that. I'm not an engineer. This would have to go to it'd have to be fully engineered and then reviewed by our engineering staff for compliance with the stormwater regs. And you cannot create, this I do know, you cannot create a stormwater condition downstream. You're not allowed to do it by code, by the state statute, I believe.
Or upstream.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Mr. Dawson, I believe you had your time. I think I'm asking the person that you're talking about here, the developer, and you could speak in to answer some of the questions that you have posed.
I was waiting to be recognized. If you'll go back to the third to the last slide, it would address those questions about what happens when you terminate the access to Market. Actually, it makes a better parking situation. And on the intersection, if you didn't want the curve road, you bring the straight road in from Cinema Drive. At that T intersection, you just make the turn to the right. One more. There we go. You just, instead of the curve up there with the driveway going into the top two buildings, if you make a T intersection, you just have that branch going to those two buildings as a private street, part of the site development plan. And then continue the public road from that T intersection over to the railroad track. Notice the parking configuration we were showing down on the lower buildings 3 and 4. You can drive in one driveway, loop around and come back out. It gives you more parking spaces and it gets you turned around. If you go to I guess the very last slide or first slide, I think it is, it shows the actual development. Ooh, there we go, right there. It's hard to see, but basically there's one driveway into the project at the end of the 30-foot right-of-way, 20-foot wide street. And we see that as going to be a challenge to manage as a municipal service in the future. And we suggest right now, in the Planning Commission meeting, the applicant said, I've got 80 feet, but I'm trying to protect trees or something like that. But he said he had 80 feet to work with. And all I'm saying is, if you don't get that right away now and you try to use that property across the railroad track, the taxpayers are gonna pay dearly for it if you have to take out some of the precious parking places and widen that road, and then you have to rebuild that road and move it to the center of the right of way. We just think now is a good time to work with the developer and work out those details. That's all. And I apologize for not saying this, but thank you very much for hearing me out tonight. My clients are gonna appreciate it. And we wish this project well, but we do hope that you've heard our concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. If anybody's going to speak, you need to speak now. You've left the building. Sorry to hear that.
Dave Spatrino, the applicant. A couple things. If the city is planning to put a transit center, which is fascinating, and I'm certainly supportive, please bring it in from Kerr Avenue, not from my site. But I think I'm glad to answer any questions. I want to make sure that I at least help you recognize that this has not been rushed through. I am on month 13, and as of Friday afternoon at 5 p.m., I'm at $718,000 in costs. So I know that's not your problem. We don't want to rush anything through, but it's not like I'm just winging it out here. I am a professional. I take this very seriously, and I refuse to even be purported that I don't follow rules, or that I'm rushing things through, or that waivers aren't a normal course of infill development. So I'm glad to answer any questions, but I assure you that there is no mechanism where city engineering has ever even winked and nodded and said, hey, don't worry about the fire department, or don't worry about stormwater. There is never a world that I've ever even known where the engineers are looking to, and I'm not maligning them, but I've never made my life easier with a room full of engineers. So we take our role seriously. We take our role to protect the environment seriously. And the idea of filling in wetlands to enlarge a road is fantastic, in that road might be something that could benefit us for light rail, which I'm very excited about, but it's not something I want to participate in, and it's not something that I'm asking here. So I hope that you understand my life would be meaningfully easier, and it would be lower cost if we closed Wetzig Road. And I would certainly support that if I only had to worry about myself and my project. The correct thing to do, the proper thing to do, and the ability to avoid being further maligned as a developer in this community is to think about the real benefit of connectivity and the solution of having at least one more mechanism or tool in our toolbox to avoid traffic congestion or people having to just go to one route or another. And I've got to acknowledge the traffic piece. Again, I recognize that we measure density by number of kitchens and not number of bedrooms. And we have chosen to do that. It's something that I wish we didn't. But again, I'd like to believe that I know who my demographic is. And the idea that we are going to be flooding Cinema Drive and all these roads with people, it's not realistic. And if it was, we'd be having much more meaningful conversations with regard to transportation and the TIA, et cetera. So I'm glad to answer questions, but please don't believe that I'm just up here rushing something through. There's a cost associated with time. I am beyond grateful that we're having this meeting today and not months from now. But at some point, a delay starts to cost someone money. And while no one seems to care so much where it comes on my end, but with a project like this, it does affect my homeowners and it does, or my residents. And I want to avoid having to increase costs in order to satisfy every single request that's being put upon me. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Madam Clerk. Madam Clerk. Time. Anybody else wants to speak? Okay. Any other questions?
Question. The homeowners association, they just came up with those ideas like this week or? Okay. Because
I thought, personally, I thought that at our last meeting when we were talking about this, speaking with Mr. Nichols, or Mr. Nichols spoke, and with Ms. Petrino speaking, that a lot of this stuff could have been resolved or was going to be resolved. Obviously, this is a whole litany of issues that Mr. Dawson has brought forward that have a lot of technical issues tied to it. And that's why we don't deal in engineering and stormwater. We determine based on what our planning staff are telling us they feel is the right thing to do. And then the technical standards are handled by the engineers and the professionals that look at this stuff and negotiate with Mr. Dawson and the homeowners association and everybody else. And sometimes they put on added restrictions, sometimes they alter, sometimes they change it. And going to Mrs. Spears' point, there are waivers based on we want to save trees, we want to save a wetland, we want to move a road over. There's not what I would call a standard boilerplate way to develop property. It's unique. Every piece is a little bit different. And these guys that do this, including Mr. Dawson and everybody else, understand that. I think the concern that we all should have is that our technical standards and our engineering department, our planning department, and fire and police, and everybody has to take a look at this. And there's a lot of people have to take a look at it, have got to make that determination. Now, we heard from the homeowners association. I think there's a concern from some of the homeowners association in regard to Wessex Drive, because I guess there is some commercial development in there in regards to the standard of the street, whether it be the width or the actual, the standard to build that street, the mountain, make sure you have enough rock under it, and it can take the wear and tear of low boys and everything else that goes through there. I would hope that our city engineers and planning people address some of that, because there seems to be some significant issue about Wessex Drive. Okay. John, did you have anything to say? I'm sorry.
Mr. Mayor, you're absolutely right. And I would note to council that in your approval ordinance, you actually make it clear that this approval, should council choose to give its approval of this rezoning, that does not relieve the developer from going through the TRC process, through the engineers, and they have to meet all the requirements before there can be a construction release. So that is built into our process.
The only question I have, and going back to the Westlake Road, I guess because I know that we want that double access. I mean, we want the connectivity. That's something we continue to talk about as council. Is just that I would just have some concern. I know that the width is what it is based on concerns about wetlands and just the overall condition of the road. But the condition of that road, I think, should meet some technical standard in regards to, just like a private access, even although they're different, the standard base of asphalt and the standard base of rock that has to be under that road, just to make sure that it's going to be a city-maintained street that we, that we maintain it in such a way so we don't have to go back through there where we have road gets torn up and you have to fix potholes and all that kind of stuff.
I mean, that is correct. The waivers for that right-of-way are all horizontal, they're not vertical. So any construction activity of that road, the base, the thickness of the asphalt, all those things would meet standard, and they would require to be standard. The waivers are only the width.
Okay. Very good. Okay, thank you. Yes, sir, Mr. Dunbar.
The thing that amazes me is a week ago tonight, they were in the hallway and had a deal. I mean, everybody was singing on the same sheet of music.
Okay. If there's no other questions from council, I'm going to close the public hearing and ask for the wishes of council.
I offer a motion to move the item.
We have a motion by Mr. Barnett,
Second.
second by Mr. Anderson. Mr. Barnett, will you read the consistent statement for the record?
Yes, sir. I move to approve the proposed amendment to rezone property located at 111 Warehouse Lane and 3804 Market Street for CS Commercial Service District to MF, MH, CD, Multiple Family Residential District, Medium High Density, Conditional District, to allow for a residential development with 192 residential units and find it to be consistent with the relevant policies in the comprehensive plan. Based on the application materials and the information provided at the public hearing and in the staff report, and to find approval of the rezoning request is reasonable and in the public interest for the following reasons. The proposed rezoning provides density in proximity to services, preserves sensitive natural areas, and is compatible with the existing development pattern.
Very good. Okay, all in favor of that motion? Please indicate by saying aye, raising your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That item passes unanimously on first reading. Is there a motion to waive second reading?
So moved.
Motion made by Mr. Ravenmark, second by Mayor Pro Tem Haynes. Discussion. All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The item passes unanimously on first as well as second reading. That brings us to our next item of business, which is item PH2A, which also has an accompanying item PH2B. And I will say that item PH2A is an ordinance modifying a UMX CD urban mixed-use district conditional district located at 1531 and 1541 Eastwood Road for a large-scale mixed-use development. And then item PH2B, which is a resolution modifying the ordinance for a special use permit for property located at 1531 and 1541 Eastwood Road to allow an increase in height up to 75 feet for 3 structures within the UMX urban mixed-use zoning district. At this time, I'd like to recognize our city manager, Mr. Cheatham. Ms. Cheatham. You might have to share a microphone there.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Joy has some suggestions for you on the sequencing of these two items.
Okay, very good. Mr. Joy?
Mr. Mayor, it's a little unusual, but my understanding is that the applicant is requesting to withdraw the special use permit, which is PH2B. That will require a vote from council, and I would ask the applicant to come in and address that with council directly for the record.
Very good. Is the applicant here?
I believe that Mr. Collier is representing the applicant, and we have dispatched Sean Evans out of my office to bring him up to the podium.
Good evening. My name is Jason Swain. I am the applicant.
So, Mr. Swain, it's our understanding that you want to withdraw item 2H, PH2B, which is the modification to the ordinance for special use permit for the 75 feet?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, very good. Thank you. So at this time, I'm going to take a vote to go ahead and to release that. So
moved.
we have a motion made by Ms. Anderson, second by Mayor Pro Tem Haynes. Discussion. All in favor?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
I understand what Mr. Swain said, but what does that mean? That's just not going to come back, or?
Mr. Joy?
The reason we juxtapose these, if you will, is because with a special use permit being quasi judicial, you have to swear everybody in, but if you go ahead and you dispose of that right now, then the conditional district rezoning, which is not quasi judicial, is legislative, it's just handled just like we did the last one. It's just a procedural, get something out of the way since it was going to be requested for withdrawal.
So the SUP is not a dead issue?
It is dead if council so allows it since it was on your agenda.
Okay. All in favor of that withdrawal, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? That item passes unanimously. So item PH2B, which is a 75 feet, has been withdrawn. Okay, that brings us to item PH2A again, which is the ordinance modifying a UMX CD urban mixed-use district conditional district located at 1531 and 1541 Eastwood Road for a large-scale mixed-use development. I will also note that whoever makes the motion must read a consistent statement for the record. This time I'd like to recognize City Manager, Ms. Cheatham. Ms. Cheatham.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Chambers will present this item.
Mr. Chambers, thank you.
Thank you. This site is located near the intersection of Eastwood Road and Military Cutoff Road. It's approximately 23 acres in size. I believe it still contains those 2 single-family homes and a vacant tract. This is a map showing the project in the context of the surrounding neighborhood. You can see Mayfair to the north, Landfall Center across Eastwood, and then Eastport directly to the southeast. We have a few photos of the site looking up and down Eastwood and then looking up and down Military Cutoff Road. On July 17th of 2018, council rezoned this property from R15 to UMX CD Urban Mixed Use Conditional District for the construction of a large-scale mixed-use development, which is Centerpoint. And this is the currently approved site plan. City Council also approved a special use permit for increased height of 75 feet for 2 structures. One would be the 75-foot tall hotel. And I thought there was is there not like there, this right here. Hey, that's cool. All right, sorry. There's a 75-foot tall hotel right here. And then the apartment building that wraps this deck was at 68 feet. So the applicant is requesting to modify the site plan to this, which would relocate the hotel to Eastwood Road, but that hotel will now be at the by right height of 55 feet and no longer 75 feet tall. And then the existing special use permit for the apartment building will remain in place, and this apartment building would stay at the 68 feet that was approved the last time you guys saw it. This slide kind of summarizes the proposed land use changes. In your packet, originally the applicant was requesting an increase in hotel apartment units and an increase in keys to the hotel number of rooms. I just found out earlier today that they wanted to reduce that back to what was originally approved. So it goes back to what they're requesting is what's in your ordinance today for the number of units, which is 300 apartment units and 200 hotel rooms. The other uses that they were requesting are actually a reduction in the overall square footage of office, retail, and restaurant space. So there's no need to update their TIA because they're actually under it and actually reducing the number of trips that are being generated at this site. The comprehensive plan calls for creation of nodes near major intersections that include both a vertical and horizontal mix of uses to reinforce the efficient use of public services and infrastructure. And the plan also supports higher density along our transit routes in order to take advantage of and support the public transit system. The Planning Commission voted to recommend approval of this modification. I'll remind you they voted for approval back when the applicant was actually proposing the increased height. So they didn't have an opportunity to consider this with the reduced height, but they still recommended approval. I'm not sure if that is important or not, but I want to bring it to your attention. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have, and the applicant is here for a presentation as well.
Okay. Any questions for staff? Mr. Barnett?
But one, yeah, so help me understand. They were originally, last week, they were talking about making 2 buildings 75 feet, right? Moving it up 75 feet. And now this going back to the original, what we proposed almost like a year ago.
Correct.
That's a factor, right?
Right. They originally, this council approved 2 structures to be up to 168 feet, which is the apartment building, and 175 feet
The
for
hotel.
the hotel.
Mhm.
They want to move the hotel, but they want to drop that down to 55 feet. So if it's by right, you don't need a special use permit for a by right height. So that's why they're withdrawing the SUP modification.
Okay. So all the other stuff that I read like last week and I couldn't sleep and stuff.
We got all
that's-
this information came in after the packets were put together and sent out. So we apologize for any confusion that caused. But I will say that I've received many calls throughout the years on this project, and everyone I've talked to has hung up with a happy tone. So the neighbors are pleased with what's being proposed at this point. The neighbors are pleased with what's being proposed at this point because they're reducing the height. And that,
Go ahead.
When did they get pleased?
I've probably got maybe 8 to 10 people that call me constantly to ask about this project. And I give them updates as to what the status is, when are they going to come in for construction, that kind of thing. I think I'm in their calendars to call every month to get an update on this. And I tell them, this is what's going on. They all called me once the signs went up, and they were like, well, what are they doing now? And I explained, and they're all like, wow, the developer actually listened. I'm really pleased with this. And that was it. That was the gist of most of the conversations we had.
Outstanding.
Mr. Grady.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I'm clear on the proposed site plan. That's what's going to be referred to in our ordinance? Is what's up on the screen there?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes,
So the
sir.
hotel there shows 55 feet. I can't see it from this far.
Yes, sir. The pink shade would be a 55-foot height.
Okay. So up there where the parking garage is, that's 55 feet?
Yes, sir.
Now, the green around it, how high is that?
The parking deck here is 55, and the green around it would be the 68 feet that the council approved last time. So there's no change there.
So there's no change. Okay. All right, so this will be the thing that we are referred to in our ordinance. That was my concern. We
Yes,
had 2 different
absolutely.
plans. And
What you see on the screen is what city council would be approving if you so choose.
This question, the name of the hotel is it supposed to be a Westin or is it, you don't know?
I'd have to defer to the applicant on that. I'm not sure.
Mr. Elmore.
There's no such thing as a dumb question, but I think I'm getting ready to ask them. I came here tonight with the idea that we were being asked to increase the special use permit up to 75 feet. The SUP has been scrapped. We're back to conditional, and they're not asking for that anymore. In fact, they've gone the opposite direction.
That's correct.
So that is not what we have in our folder.
No, sir, it is not
Okay. How old is that plan?
today.
Okay.
that was what I was concerned about, Charlie. I was looking at, we were being asked to
Right.
approve a plan that wasn't what they were
Yes, sir.
proposing.
Can you send that to us or tomorrow?
Oh,
maybe?
absolutely. I apologize.
That's all right.
There's so many moving parts on this all the way up till right before this meeting.
Yes, sir.
We thought it was more important to get them handled with their special use permit withdrawn. That was the main thing that we were trying to get taken
I've
care
had all
of.
this heartburn for nothing.
But Brian, the only 2 changes are the height of the parking deck, where it's gone from whatever color that is, lime green or turquoise to pink, correct?
That parking deck was, if you look at
There's
the
no
original
change
plan,
Yeah.
that parking deck was already
Well, I'm
55
saying it's
feet.
different from the plan we're looking at. It
Yes.
was all green, now it's got a little pink in it. And
Right,
then
well,
the hotel,
right, this is the old plan. So the hotel was here at 75. New plan, it's 55 over here. The old plan, it has the apartments wrapping the parking deck here with the parking deck being 55 feet and then this blue being 68. And then the new plan has the parking deck still at 55 feet with the wrapped apartments and retail below at 68 feet.
we were just going at it from
And
different.
I'm more than happy to send this out. I apologize for not getting it to you before the meeting.
Mayor Pro Tem.
I'm I'm glad they withdrew the extra request. It seems like this second plan just has, I thought, what we were trying to avoid, which is a sea of parking at ground level. So my concern is, if they're reducing the retail, why do we now have all of this parking on the ground when they could have probably one more level at least on the parking deck and stay at the whatever 68 feet or something like the apartments around it, instead of having the deck be whatever the difference is between 55 and 68? I guess that's 13 feet. I don't get it. I mean, I don't understand it. When you're reducing your retail and now you have all this parking, it's going to look like the Kmart parking lot.
Well, I would have to defer to the applicant as to their parking needs on this, but I will say that staff did work with them to try to line the entrances with the building, so you're at least to make an attempt to put the parking behind the building. It didn't happen in every instance. Obviously, you can see that here you've got an entrance with the parking on the other side. I can't speak to what their market needs are for the parking, the surface parking. They would probably have a better answer than I would, but we did try to work with it the best we could to hide it as best we could.
Yeah, the beauty of the structured parking, which I think often the citizens don't grasp, is that the parking basically is sort of hidden, and it goes vertically rather than horizontally. I mean, I'm opposed to all of this sea of cars that are seen from the street.
Yes, ma'am.
Brian, can any of that parking be kind of looked at as future development?
I believe so. The UMX doesn't have a minimum parking requirement, so any parking lot that you see could in the future have a building on it. Hypothetically, yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Would they come back?
If they wanted to add a building, they'd have to come back before you guys to show the new site plan.
Okay. Any other questions?
Were the number of cars parked in the deck reduced, the number of spaces in the deck? I know the height was left, but did they actually, I mean, one deck looks actually smaller.
I might have to rely on the applicant to give me the true numbers of that deck. I don't think that they, I know they changed a little bit. Let me see if I got it. Yes, the deck spaces were at 1,660 and now they're down to 991 in the deck, in the proposed decks.
Okay, so that's like 500 spaces or something,
Yeah.
400
Yes,
and
ma'am.
some. So, but then the 400 spaces look like they might be added on the street
And,
or on the lot.
they were.
And they were. I thought we're trying to get away
understand.
from that.
Again, I have to defer to the applicant as to, I mean, what we hear is that the future tenants need a certain amount of surface parking, and that's what we hear every time that somebody comes in with one of these
Well, they
projects.
didn't need it in the first design.
Right, I just can't speak to that.
Thank you.
Okay. Does it sound like to recognize the applicant on item PH2A?
Good evening. My name is Jason Swain. I'm with a company called Swain and Associates. We're a small family-owned development firm here in Wilmington, and we're back before you again this evening with a few modifications to our development plan for a project that we have proposed at the intersection of Military Cutoff and Eastwood Road. As many of you know, we started this project about 4 years ago, and we came through last year in July and received unanimous approval at City Council and at Planning Commission as well for our project. The reason that we're back here tonight is really because of a change that was necessitated by our working with the Department of Transportation. And I'll address something that you all were talking about a moment ago. It's not often the developer comes in and asks to downscale his project. And I know that may seem a little odd, but I'll explain why that is in a moment as well. Initially, at the intersection of Drysdale Drive and Military Cutoff Road, we had proposed a 75-foot hotel. When we originally developed our plan and came through for approval, NCDOT had given us their roadway plans for Drysdale Drive extension. However, after we received approval and DOT finished its roadway design, they decided that they needed additional right-of-way at the intersection of Military Cutoff and Drysdale Drive extension. And so while I don't have a pointer, essentially at that corner, they took a significant portion of our parking lot, which made it infeasible for us to develop a hotel there. The reason being that there was not adequate parking for loading and unloading at the hotel door. So what we decided after looking at our plan and moving things around a lot was that the best way to accommodate a hospitality component would be to move the hotel from the intersection of Military Cutoff and Drysdale Extension to Eastwood and Drysdale Extension. So that's the purple building that you see there right now. When we through Planning Commission, I guess right before the pandemic really began, we requested that that building stay 75 feet in height because that was what was originally approved when the hotel was on the other end of the project. Additionally, we asked for one additional floor on the multifamily component of the project, which is back in the back portion of the project. Since that time, at the Planning Commission meeting, there was opposition from the neighbors. Since that time, we have given a lot of thought to that and communicated with neighbors, and we've decided that to be a good neighbor in turn, and in the spirit of cooperation and harmony with all the people that are around us, we will, in fact, withdraw our request to have the hotel component be the additional 25 feet. So we're reducing it to 55 feet, which is the maximum that's allowed in the district by height. And we're keeping the multifamily, the 68 feet that was originally approved, instead of asking for the additional floor. That seemed to be a big issue for Cambridge Village, which we believe is going to be a valuable neighbor for us. And so we would like to accommodate them. And the folks who are across Eastwood Road also had concerns about the 75-foot height of the hotel. So we want to accommodate them as well. Ultimately, our family has been here since 1989. We live and work here, and our goal is to develop a project that our community is proud of and that our neighbors are proud of, and that when all this is done, we can all come together and say this is a first-class project that really sets the stage for what kind of development we want in Wilmington. So with that said, I'm happy to stay around and answer questions. Richard Collier is my engineer, and I'm going to ask him to come up now and talk about details. Again, I can't thank you all enough. We're excited about the project and look forward to beginning soon, hopefully, with your blessing.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Richard Collier, 243 North Street, 243 Front Street in Wilmington, North Carolina. Next slide for me, Greg. I think as been discussed, CenterPoint is a mixed use that will have some live, some work, and some play all in the same place. And the benefits of that, we all know of mixed use. It gives some height. It gives folks places to go where they live. It gives them places to work where they live. And everything is near the services, and the services are easy to get to. On CenterPoint or on that property, we're talking about having apartments, hotels, medical office, general office, retail, and restaurant types, whether it's fine and casual dining type opportunities. This is the same as it was in 2018. Next slide. This is the CD zoning modification plan, which really just sets it up for its UMX zoning, and the right-of-ways would be general UMX. And it shows that we have decreased in our we've decreased our overall restaurant and retail numbers. Predominantly, that's because there was a bigger box in under the multifamily section that was reserved for a grocer. When that grocer pulled out, or the one that they were working with pulled out, they needed to pull that square foot out. So that's where the largest reduction in square feet of retail has occurred. We also have 4,300 square foot decrease in our office use, and we're shifting that location of the hotel to the corner of Drysdale and Eastwood as discussed earlier. Next slide. So we are withdrawing our SUP, which is an odd thing for anyone to understand. So this is the color drawing I think you guys were referring to earlier. And I'm going to try to walk through each one at a time so you can see what the heights are in this proposal tonight, which is different than your package, but it should shed some light and hopefully answer the questions. Next slide. One more after this one, please. All right, so the first slide it's showing a building coming in. Click one more time. So it's showing the building, now the hotel slide. So the hotel, we're going to use request having it stay at by right 55 feet. So the only change in the hotel that we've asked for this evening is its location, moving it from the intersection of Drysdale and Military Cutoff and locating it over at Eastwood and Drysdale, as Jason spoke of just a few minutes ago. And it would remain 55 feet. It would not be, it will revert from its 75 feet that was approved previously. Next slide, go ahead and click 2 times, please. So the blue building in the square is the area that is the apartment building, which also has retail on the ground floor along the plaza area and the street. That building was approved, the multifamily was approved in 2018 at 68 feet, and the parking deck was 55 feet during that original approval. So we have determined that it's in best interest of the project and all the neighbors associated and other stakeholders to leave that at those approvals from the 2018 plan. 2 more clicks, please. So this is the office building, that office/medical office building, also along Eastwood Road. In our original application, we were requesting that the height of that building was increased as well, but we've since removed that request, and that office building will only be the by right 55 feet. Next 2 slides. As the south parking deck, the south parking deck will remain 55 feet as it was approved in 2018. One more time. All the retail buildings in purple will remain the 24 feet, 25 feet that were approved in our original approval in 2018. And then the last slide. One more, there we go. The green building coming in is an office over retail building, and that building would be 50 feet. So we have 55 feet on Eastwood Road. We have a 55-foot parking deck, the south deck to the right of it, that's red. The green building just below that is a 50-foot office over retail building. All of the purple buildings are 1-story retail or restaurant type buildings. And then the bluer building in the larger square is the multifamily wrapping the parking deck. And that parking multifamily building would be 68 feet and the parking deck would be 55 feet. Next slide, please. This slide represents the 2018 plan and the 2020 plan. And yes, I gave Brian the updated portion of this plan earlier today to provide in his presentation and at ours. The reason it was changed this morning was just making sure that the heights were being shown correctly to council this evening. We know we were going to withdraw it, but we wanted to make sure that the heights are being represented correctly so that any of the neighbors and stakeholders understand, as well as council, what we are proposing. As you can see, it is not tremendously different. The largest change is where the hotel moves from Drysdale and Military over to Eastwood Road. There is some more surface parking than was in the original project. Some of it has to do with convenience parking for the retail restaurateurs, and some have to do with parking near the hotel to be able to have some level of drop off and pick up, plus even temporary parking for the guests while they're loading and unloading. The street, the center street, main street going through the project, there's a roundabout by the southern deck. That roundabout is still in place. However, the alignment of the street from the roundabout to Drysdale Drive has been adjusted. Jason mentioned earlier the DOT right-of-way issues. Part of that is in this realignment of this street and in the right-of-way access when they secured the land to provide that signal and access into the Eastport Village property. So the signal poles themselves are what has increased the right-of-way at the entrance, and in doing that, it pushed everything out, and that's the biggest reason in a lot of the changes on this southern end of the property. Next slide, please. These are the improvements that are being proposed. That were proposed in the TIA. We are still planning on all of these being made. The blue are the improvements that the developer is responsible for. And then all of the Drysdale Drive Street, NCDOT is funding under their TIP project. We're still working with NCDOT to better understand as all the delays and the timing of their projects to make sure everyone knows when Drysdale Drive would be coming to fruition. Next slide, please. Access to the site remains the same. We still have access out of 5 different locations from the property, one onto Eastwood Road, one onto Drysdale Drive, and then we have a public street connection on Military Cutoff from Calypso. We would be extending Calypso Drive from Cambridge Village so that road will now connect through between Cavalier Drive and Military Cutoff. So it gives a little better circulation for everybody in the area. We also show a connection to the Mayfair Community Center to the north, and that discussion and easement will be forthcoming as we get into the technical parts of the design. Next slide, please. Pedestrian activity or interconnectivity is always a big issue, and it has been in our city for a long time. We've invested a tremendous amount of money on the Cross City Trail, so we are extending, and as DOT is extending up Drysdale Drive, a portion of the Cross City Trail, they will extend it over to Military Cutoff, and then it can connect across the street with the trail that goes north on Military Cutoff. It will also provide access to the opposite side, the eastern side of Military Cutoff, and that's where the bus stop is located currently. And at that signalized entrance, there will be pedestrian lights for you to cross the street back and forth safely. We're also providing paths through our plaza and connections to Cambridge Village along the creek that's on the southern portion of our project. So that will then also provide a walking path for our neighbors or our residents, people on the Cross City Trail. They can come down and walk through, and as David Swain has said a couple of times, sit down and have a glass of wine at one of the restaurants in the plaza. So we want to make sure that this is pedestrian friendly, as well as provide for all the accesses into and out of the property. Next slide, please. This is the image that was presented to Planning Commission back in March. The image really is unchanged. It shows the multifamily building in the rear, the back right. Then you see the retail and restaurants in the lower right hand, the foreground. Then the center area, the circle that's down near the Drysdale Drive intersection, that is where we're proposing our sign, but it is really hiding an NCDOT drainage, open drainage area that would flow through there and continue on. That's the area Jason spoke of early on that encroached over into the hotel parking area and started the ball rolling down the hill of shifting the location of the hotel itself. You can see the 2 office buildings, the hotel and the office building in the background, as well as south parking deck and the retail shops and the connections of Drysdale Drive with all of the pedestrian access. Next slide, please. Common spaces remain the same. Everything about our project and its feel and the intent of the project, interior, and having it pedestrian friendly and having it a place that folks want to come and gather and spend time with their friends has remained exactly the same as it has from 2018. Next slide. So finally, our 2020 UMX CD modification, we are going to live, we're going to work, we're going to play, and all of that's incorporated into mixed use. Next slide. So the 2020 modifications, we listened to the neighbors and the stakeholders on the height, and that height has been reduced. We reduced those heights on Eastwood Road and the building heights all to 55 feet. That hotel location's been shifted to the Eastwood and Drysdale Drive intersection. The medical office and the general office uses are still included, and that was at a request from Cambridge. They were I think the wording of how we put office into our last modification it took out the word medical office. It's not gone away. We wrote it as general office in the modification, but medical office and general office are still uses included. We maintained the 2018 approved number of multifamily units and the hotel rooms, and then finally, we have CenterPoint 2020. We hope these modifications are received well by council and by this local stakeholders. We appreciate your time this evening. We know it's short notice in having the SUP removed off your agenda. but we feel that based on citizen comments, neighbors, stakeholders, reducing those heights and keeping them at the by right 55 feet with the parking decks is a much better project overall for everyone and will be received by the community much better long term. We greatly appreciate it, and we ask you if you have questions. That Jason and I both are here to answer those. And I think we have a number of folks from the community that may also want to speak, but thank you.
Sure.
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem.
Richard, I think generally, you know, it's a nice center, a nice development, a nice project. My concern is what I mentioned earlier, and that the city of Wilmington is really trying to move to the idea of not just having this sea of cars. And it seems like you've reduced the number of spaces in the deck and have put those spaces actually on the ground. And they also are visible from the main thoroughfares. And I certainly, you know, liked the original plan much better in that you did not see all of this sea of parking. You want to speak to that?
Yes, ma'am, I'll be happy to. If you would go back one or two slides for me, please, Greg. Right, one more. So in looking at this, yes, there are more surface parking, Mayor Pro Tem, than there was in our 2018 plan. We have located the the retail and restaurant area on the southern side, out in front of where the hotel was located previously. We have put in the spaces to handle all of that retail in its layout as it is today. We've got the buildings, the parking is behind and to the rear of all, beside and to the rear of all those buildings. We will have landscaping in all of the islands inside, plus pedestrian crossings. We're doing everything that's possible to add character to a parking lot so that it doesn't become a sea of asphalt. I don't think the Swains want the sea of asphalt any more than the city does. And we feel like with the improvements that are being made at the corner in the where the sign area is, that landscaping feature there, we'll be able to buffer that corner so that you're not seeing directly into the parking areas. The buildings are up at the street 5 feet off, so that they're taking most of the sight lines of that parking area. And then along Calypso Drive, as you're going up Calypso towards Cavalier, you'll see two drive aisles in, and then parking islands, landscape parking islands, and those type things with walkways. The other area behind the hotel, behind and beside the hotel, that area will have a fence out along the right-of-way itself that's buffering the parking, so you do not see it from the street. It will have a fencing and landscaping to make sure that the most buffering we can provide is incorporated into the plan. I'm not sure that there's a real good reason why we adjusted a lot of the buildings the way we did. That the hotel was the one that really needed to move after some of the DOT improvements to get that drop-off parking in that area. The retail restaurant buildings are virtually the same, except in this area where the hotel moved. And I think that's the area that folks are seeing the sea of asphalt. And I think with pedestrian crossing, pedestrian walkways, landscaping, those types of improvements that we'll add in during the technical review part of the project, I think that will cut down on what the visual, how you see the parking lot from the adjacent roadways.
How many additional surface parking spaces are there from the first plan, which has been approved, to this current plan you're asking approval for?
The specific number, I don't know the specific number. I know that increased number is about 400 in surface parking. And the bulk of that is in that area out by, in between the residential building, the retail buildings out in the hotel pad. Now, the other part of that is the parking deck on the multifamily building. It has a parking deck, and then there is also a 71 space surface parking lot that is under the podium of the apartments in what was the old grocery store area. So of this 400 increase, 71 of those are under the deck. We didn't include them in the parking deck numbers, purely because they're not in the parking deck. They are surface, considered surface, and they're adjacent to that northern parking deck at the multifamily building.
But that's not really, I mean, you can't really visually see that on the plan that we have. What we see is this sort of reverting back to an old-fashioned idea of having all of these surface spaces, and they're not even, I mean, I don't know what kind of fence you're planning on having, but generally we have the retail near the street so that you don't see the parking. So you drastically increase the number of surface spaces, and they're not, you're not incorporating what I think the comprehensive plan has tried to move developers in the direction of making things more attractive by either having structured parking, which I appreciate that you have that because I know it's very expensive, but trying to alleviate, not increase this sea of parking. I find that disappointing in your new proposal.
Yes, ma'am. And Greg, if you could go back to my second or third slide, that's just the overall site plan, please. It may be, I think that's the quickest way to get there. And my point's going to be, Ms. Haynes, is that the street itself, the main street of the project, still maintains all of the elements of the comprehensive plan with parking beside and behind. Where the unfortunate part comes in is where Drysdale Drive is located. And Drysdale Drive, which on the map, on the eastern end, the way the map's laying, which is the northern end, all of our buildings are between the street and the parking. On the western end by the hotel, we have the parking lots on either side of the entry drive. And we had buildings there back in 2018, smaller retail buildings and restaurant buildings there on the corners that helped block some of those. But you start looking at, should you service the main street coming down and have a main street retail, which is a lot of what's contemplated in the comprehensive plan, and then protect those two parking areas from the adjacent, what will be an arterial street in Drysdale Drive. And which one is the better way to handle it and provide the parking that the retail components are looking for. Now, the other thing that's not showing up as well, our original plans, the on-street parking was parallel parking. And we have proposed 45-degree angled spaces, which is going to increase that surface parking along the main street through the center point, which is Center Point Drive, if you will. And those spaces are the same, they're in the same location, just different orientation. So in terms of what is being generated in impervious surface, we've not increased the impervious surface, we've probably decreased it through some of the modifications that we've made over the last 6 or 8 months.
Yes, sir, Ms. Anderson.
Mr. Collier, I think I tend to agree with you on the if you're choosing which street to locate the retail nearest, because it's more pedestrian friendly. The folks on Drysdale, for the most part, are just going to be trying to get from point A to point B, and along that street, hopefully it's very pedestrian friendly. I think you pointed that out yourself, if Margaret didn't first. The only area that's kind of problematic is that Drysdale intersection. I don't suppose anybody on your team happens to have something on hand to kind of a rendering kind of that intersection from a street level to see what kind of fence, you think you used the word fence, or, is it a brick wall? Is it trees, flower? I mean, something like that would really help us, I think, visualize what that intersection looks like. And from other council members, they may be going, what are you talking about? I'm talking about the light. There's 2 pockets of parking there at the light at Drysdale. That seems to be the only spot that's really opened up. So, Richard, anything by chance that you might have, or you want to just be more descriptive of what your plans are there along Drysdale?
Mr. Anderson, I do not have an aerial image of that here with me tonight. No, I'm very sorry. I should have brought those and I did not. The description of it would be whether it's a brick column and wooden fence in between, color, I don't know if it's white, whatever the color needs to be. It's a 6 or 8 foot tall type fencing, and then it would have landscaping associated with it. The Swains want this to be a very heavily landscaped area. That intersection is going to be utilitarian in nature because it will be a steel strain pole signal location. And one of the corners has one of the really pretty silver boxes for the traffic controller out there on it as well. Although I don't have a drawing of the fence here that I could show you tonight, but I could assure you that the fence itself would be some type of.
The only thing I can kind of think of just on the fly is when I drive through like South Park in Charlotte, there's some situations like this, and they put up, brick walls and ivy grow on them and everything, and it just, you don't even know what's on the other side of that, other side of that fence, and it's in a thoroughfare anyway. So it works well. So I would urge you to consider that. I don't know how we exactly do that today. The other thing, and I think and you can defer, hopefully Mr. Swain can hear the question because he may be more equipped for it. But I think so many times we're sitting here looking at a site plan, and for y'all to get into all the numbers is, beyond what we do, the scope of what we do, understand probably. But I would be curious, a couple things. You mentioned the grocery store moved out. I'm sure market conditions have changed. I wonder if Mr. Swain could speak to, I know there were 5 restaurant pads, we're now to 1. And that may be what the market's driving. I just would love a comment on that. I know you were going through this before COVID, so I don't know if if that's impacted it, if the Amazon world we live in of deliveries, just the world you're trying to succeed in as Swain Company, how if it's affected these changes and how it has without you divulging anything private.
Good evening, Mr. Anderson. Thank you so much for your comments. Let me see if I can address a couple of different things. First of all, let me see if I can quickly touch on the intersection of Military Cutoff and Drysdale Drive extension. That corner is really critical to our entire project. As traffic is coming down Eastwood Road, headed north on Drysdale Drive extension and then on to Military Cutoff Road, there will be a significant amount of traffic there, and then also coming south, headed back towards Martin Luther King as well. So it is a top priority for us to make sure that that area is as lush and as attractive as any part of the project, because it's really going to be our calling card. While we haven't picked out finishes and things like that, I can tell you that we are using the same design firm that has worked with John Kane at North Hills and Raleigh, and they've done a fantastic job with the development that has occurred there, and is really sort of the benchmark that we've been going for. Additionally, we developed the forum out on Military Cutoff Road, and if you spend any time at the forum, you probably noticed that along the front of the shopping center, we have lush grass, pretty flowers, and pretty trees as well. If you're walking down the sidewalk in front of the shops at night, my dad likes to joke that the landscaping in front of the forum is nicer than the landscaping at both of our homes. And that's generally the idea that we're going for here as well. We want Centerpoint to be a real focal point, and we don't intend to do anything other than really first-class finishes and a first-class look. So maybe that addresses some of the questions that you had there at the intersection. The other question I think that you had was about different size boxes and why different size boxes ended up different places.
Just more market forces, how it's driving. What's going on in your market? Because you've gone from 5 restaurants to 1.
Sure.
And some of this may be just labeling, but that's the way the other one looked like. It had 5 restaurants and 1, and like I think Richard mentioned, I think there was big plans for medical in the back corner, and it says office now, but I think Richard was saying that was just a labeling issue. But I'm just trying to help understand better what you're having to deal with and trying to build something that's leasable.
Sure. And that's an excellent question. And, since the pandemic has occurred, really life has shifted a lot for a whole lot of people, especially in our industry. We've developed over the course of our company's history, we've developed about 3 million square feet of space across the Carolinas. We've got several hundred tenants, and we have been very proactive in working with each and every one of our small shop tenants at all of our properties, because ultimately they're the backbone of every property that we have, and they're why our properties work. So in planning for CenterPoint, one of the big things that we've made, a big change that we made to the site plan, was removing the grocery store box. A big reason for that was, as you're probably all aware, Earth Fare closed over at Renaissance. And the last thing that we wanted to do was to have another grocery store box coming online along a corridor where there was already one that was existing and vacant. So, market forces really determined that that was the best course of action for us. We certainly don't want to build anything that we have trouble leasing. Not only is it a blight on the community, but it's, certainly not good for us as a company and a financial investment either. Additionally, we've changed some of the sizes of the different boxes and locations of the boxes to try to coincide with what we feel will be easiest to lease to various and sundry users. So you brought up specifically restaurants, and the restaurant industry is undergoing a pretty dramatic change right now. The restaurants that have been able to adapt by having curbside service, delivery, and things like that have been successful. But what we have found in our industry and are finding, and I think we will continue to find, of the restaurants that survived the pandemic, is that most of them will look for less square footage. Not only will they look for less square footage interior space, but they'll look for more square footage on the outside of the space where people can come and sit outside and not have to worry about being inside in the event of a pandemic. I think it's just a systemic change we're going to see in our industry. Additionally, and this sort of goes to some of the parking as well, we have found at our shopping centers where we have ample available curbside parking, those restaurants and retailers have been able to flourish during the pandemic. I'll give you an example. Our office building is out on Military Cutoff Road, and we have a store named Chicken Salad Chick that is right next door to our office. And if you haven't been, I highly recommend it. They're great people and a great product. But on day one after the governor opened or allowed restaurants to open, they were out in the parking lot with signs, had reached out to all of their customers, and were back in business to the best of their ability doing takeout service. I think a lot of retailers during the pandemic have really realized that this is a very viable way to keep their business going in the future if there's another situation like this that arises. That and drive-through lanes and windows are very important right now as well. We don't have room for that on the project, but we do have room for curbside parking. And to the extent that those buildings up at the intersection of Drysdale Drive and Military Cutoff Road have access to those, we think it's very important, as opposed to someone parking in the parking deck where the grocery store was and having to walk 200 or so feet to the restaurant or to the business to pick up their merchandise. I do believe, if you look right now at projects across the spectrum, larger projects that have larger boxes are struggling. The large national retailers, especially in the apparel industry, are having a tough time right now. What we have found is that smaller shop spaces, local tenants are much more flexible and able to adjust to changing market conditions. They also have less overhead because their spaces are generally less expensive on a monthly basis too. I hope I have not gone on too long to answer your question.
No, that's all helpful. I think we walk into this with a drawing and there's a context to everything, and it's good to learn. Thanks.
Yes, sir. And I will say one other thing too, with regard to the office, we would very much like for that to be office and medical. If all medical, that's certainly fine with us. As my dad has said a number of times when we originally came before you all, there is a need for more medical services on this side of town. No question about it. There is a New Hanover Regional has an emergency room north on the Pender line, which is somewhat convenient for people on this side of town. But to the extent that additional medical is possible on this quadrant of the community, and with all the good things that are happening now with the future of our hospital in the community, we would welcome that opportunity to have additional medical here. So thank you.
Mr. Swain, in that vein, is this something that you can develop in the out years on the site?
Ask me that question again. I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
What you were just talking about, the need for medical, what have you, or not just medical, but I mean, are you all in a position where you feel comfortable further developing the site where some of that surface parking is?
If demand warranted, we would certainly do so. The big concern that I have got, though, is while we don't want to have a sea of surface parking like was mentioned, I want to make sure that I have sufficient parking to accommodate my retailers so that people aren't parking and walking long distances because that becomes problematic in keeping those spaces leased, quite honestly. And I will say this, Mr. Rivenbark, too. 2/3 of our parking spaces on this site are in the parking decks. We have about 1,000 structured parking spaces. And so, while our goal in this community, now that we have developed out, is going to be to develop up, we're really proud of the fact that we're really one of the first projects, really the first retail project that I can think of that's in the city limits, that's outside of the downtown area, that is building as much structured parking as we are on the site. I think that you don't necessarily want to be the person that's leading the charge, but we sort of by default are, I guess you could say.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Ms. Barnett?
Just a question, Jason. In 2018, I believe you guys mentioned that the hotel would be a Westin. Is that still in the works, or are you allowed to say that?
Yes, sir, Mr. Barnett. I can tell you, I would love to have the Westin here, but I cannot commit to you today that this is where they are going to be. We would very much like to have a high quality hotel. And if it's the Westin, then I would certainly welcome that opportunity. We are talking with, and have been talking really prior to the pandemic, with all the major national hotel chains. They've all essentially they all know of Wilmington. Wilmington is on the top of everyone's mind. And we have had conversations with all of them about different components of our project. So, the pandemic has really hit that industry very hard. And I believe that that most of the hotel brands now are slowing their development. But we want to make sure that we have the right mix of uses on the project, and our proximity to the beach, our proximity to I-40 and Military Cutoff Road Extension, we believe makes this an excellent location for a first-class hotel such as that.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Clifford, to your question, I believe that the Westin was at the Avenue, which was further down on Eastwood Road. Mr. Roy Carroll was the one that was proposing, I'm sorry, a Military Cutoff was proposing the Westin at that location. Okay, any other questions, Mr. Swain? Okay, Ms. Swain, thank you.
Thank you very much. Like I said, we're real excited about the project, and we can't thank you all enough for your kind consideration.
Okay, thank you. This time I'm going to open up the public hearing, set the public hearing for 30 minutes, and set it, Madam Clerk, give each individual an opportunity to speak for 3 minutes. Try to get as many speakers through as possible. So we ready, Madam Clerk? Okay. Our first speaker, if you'll state your name for the record and where you live, and thank you.
Good evening. Thank you. My name is Frank Bio. I live directly across from, I live in the Point Somerset area, which is on Eastwood, directly across from the development. Thought I would express a thank you for considering the information that we had given in the past and taking into account that that you're now back to the norm, as we might say, with respect to the building height. Not excited about the 68-foot easement or release that was given, but we can live with that a little better than having it at 75 feet on the Eastwood side. So I guess maybe I'm here to just thank you for taking our information into account in the redesign.
Next.
Mr. Mayor, it looks like that's it.
Okay, thank you. Are there any further questions from council? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to close the public hearing and ask for the wishes of council, and I will also note that whoever makes the motion must read a consistent statement for the record. A motion made by Mr. Ravenbach, second by Mr. Spears. I'm sorry, Mr. Anderson. PH 2A. Mr. Ravenbach, will you please turn on your mic? It's all. Thank you, sir.
I move to approve the proposed amendment to rezone property located at 1531 and 1541 Eastwood Road to modify an existing UMX CD urban mixed-use district, conditional district for a large-scale mixed-use development, CenterPoint, to increase the number of residential units and hotel rooms, decrease the overall retail and restaurant space, and adjust the site layout, including the relocation of the proposed hotel, and find it to be consistent with the relevant policies in the comprehensive plan. Based on the application materials, the information provided at the public hearing, and in the staff report, and to find approval of the rezoning request as reasonable and in the public interest for the following reasons. The proposed modification would allow for a mixed-use project that would help create a transit and pedestrian-oriented development pattern and includes a diverse mix of uses that will improve access to goods and services for area residents.
Thank you. Okay. All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye, raising your hand.
Aye.
Any opposed? That item passes unanimously on first reading. Is there a motion to waive second reading? Motion made by Mayor Pro Tem Haynes, second by Councilmember Barnett. Discussion. All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Item passes unanimously on first as well as second reading. That brings us to our next item of business, which is item PH3A, which is an ordinance amending the official zoning map of the city to rezone property containing 0.42 of an acre of land located at 2323 Wrightsville Avenue from CS Commercial Services to CBCD Community Business Conditional District in the Wrightsville Avenue corridor overlay to allow for 4,000 square feet of commercial space and a maximum of 5 residential units. And then item PH3, which is the accompanying item, which is a resolution granting or denying a special use permit for property located at 2323 Wrightsville Avenue to allow a new structure over 3,000 square feet and to permit a laundromat with no drive-out windows in the Wrightsville Avenue corridor overlay. And I will note that all those wishing to speak need to be sworn in by the city clerk. This is Penelope Spicer Sidbury. Who's going to speak?
Sean, would you see if anyone's out there who wants to be in?
will also note for the record that whoever makes the motion must read a consistent statement, and I will also note for the record that PH3B councils will only need one vote on that particular item. So we will take the one public hearing for both the items. Mr. Joy?
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor. I don't believe there's been any objection from the applicant. I'm looking at them and I see no objection to that. And I will note for the record that the applicant has been informed that they have the right of cross-examination if they so choose.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Okay. Mr. Cheatham?
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Walton will provide this presentation.
Okay. Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council. The item before you tonight is to rezone the site from commercial services to community business to allow a 4,000 square foot commercial space and a maximum of 5 residential units. A special use permit is also proposed to allow a new structure over 3,000 square feet in the Wrightsville Avenue corridor, as well as to permit a laundromat use with no drop-up windows. The Land Development Code requires the issuance of a special use permit for new non-residential or multifamily structures exceeding 3,000 square feet in the Wrightsville Avenue corridor. In the CV Community Business District, a portion of the corridor, laundromats with no drop-up windows are only allowed by issuance of SUP. This is an overall site showing the location. The parcel is currently vacant, but was previously occupied by a self-service car wash facility. There's no known zoning history on site. These are the adjacent photos showing a convenience mart next door. It's adjacent to multifamily and across the street, and a commercial site in the rear of the site. I think it's a tire shop. Of the proposed commercial space, 3,000 square feet would be of a laundromat use, 1,000 square feet would be commercial, and 5 residential units are proposed as part of a commercial district mixed-use development. The project proposes to continue utilizing existing driveway access on Wrightsville Avenue. The Wrightsville Avenue is identified as a community connector for planned and conceptual green connections as identified on the comprehensive plan. Growth strategies map. The proposal consists of infill development consistent with the surrounding area with little impact to adjacent properties, allowing services such as laundromats within walking distance of multifamily and single family developments are encouraged. There we go. The Wrightsville Avenue 2030 plan encourages a balanced mix of land uses that offer options for residents while ensuring new developments enhances the corridor and enhances the surrounding neighborhoods. The plan recommends to phase out CS uses and encourage neighborhood scale commercial uses that generate minimal amounts of traffic and complement the adjacent neighborhoods. By placing commercial services and multifamily residences within walking distance of the current CSX rail corridor, the project is consistent with the broad transportation objectives of the city rail realignment and repurposing initiative. Staff believes the amendment is generally consistent with the policies of the Create Wilmington Comprehensive Plan, the Wrightsville Avenue 2030 Plan, the city's adopted focus areas. If the council votes to approve this item tonight, we have suggested conditions contained in the case summary. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions for staff? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So I'd like to recognize the applicant.
Good evening. My name is Jeff Carney. I live at 6001 Mott's Village Road, and I'm the owner of the property. At this time, I'd like to bring up Ms. Wolf to discuss my petition.
Good evening. I'm Cindy Wolf, and I've been helping Mr. Carney through this process. this is one of those sort of dream type of projects that are just, it checks all the boxes of what we're hoping for as far as redevelopment in our city. Certainly this stretch of Wrightsville Avenue near the railroad crossing has been transitioning over the years. They have the nice trolley development right across the street. And what was the car wash was deteriorated and certainly becoming an eyesore. So I applaud Mr. Carney for going ahead before anything, and he has already demolished that, and it's a vacant parcel. Regardless, the commercial services district that overlays it now has much more intense uses, and they're certainly not always appropriate for the historic character of the Wrightsville Avenue corridor. Although the Create Wilmington Comprehensive Plan failed to include the subject site in that area of opportunity that's closest, it is still very near to other properties identified as post-industrial and inner-city revitalization, and also the live-work innovation zone. So what we've proposed here, and in the purest sense, the commercial district mixed use that we sometimes argue is being taken advantage of, this is a 50-50 kind of split for the amount of commercial use on the ground floor and the live work play type of opportunities in the up to 5 units that would be overhead. Redevelopment of the site will certainly improve the aesthetics of the area. New construction to current building codes, the enhancement with landscaping and overall maintenance of the property will all be a benefit in this area. And upgrading the form and function of an underutilized site certainly maximizes site efficiency. Next slide, please. This is the plan. It's a small site. It is sandwiched in between the railroad right-of-way, Wrightsville Avenue, and what is an existing convenience store. We've taken a lot of time with his architect to come up with the concept that Jeff showed you, and we've kept the parking off to the side. So everything about the site and some community areas behind it for the residents really fits into the character of the Wrightsville Avenue corridor. That pretty much, I think, justifies in our mind the rezoning section of it. But because this building is larger than 3,000 square feet, of course, we have the special use permit. And the findings for that are the public health, safety, and welfare. Certainly taking down that deteriorated car wash was a big part of that. We would have public services for the sewer and water. And then go through all of the Wilmington Code requirements for the plan. This plan does meet all of the required conditions and specifications of design. We certainly don't believe that it would substantially injure the value of adjoining abutting property. Redevelopment of the site will improve the aesthetics of the area immediately around it, and enhancement will be a benefit to the surrounding properties. And the location and character, if the use is developed according to this plan, we agree with all of the staff conditions that were recommended. This would be an asset to the Wrightsville Avenue corridor. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have on the project.
Are there any questions, Ms. Wolf?
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wolf. Okay. At this time, I'm going to open up the public hearing and ask if anyone in the public wishes to speak on either one of these items, PH3B or PH3A. Okay, thank you. Seeing none, are there any further questions from council?
Go ahead,
Go ahead, Mrs. Spears.
I was just gonna ask about the prices as far as the apartment rental.
Excuse me?
Apartment rental?
Oh,
The
yeah.
pricing, market
Yes,
value pricing, or
yeah.
where we stand at as far as those? I mean, I think it's a great idea, but I just want to ask.
I'm sorry, sir, I didn't understand
It
what
was
you
about
asked.
the pricing of the units of the apartments that are up
residential
above.
units.
I don't know that it has really been thought out at this point. We have done a conceptual of, could we fit 5 one-bedroom apartments there? Yes. Might they be better if there was 3 two-bedrooms? So pricing as far as that will be market for this particular community in that area. You've got the trolley station across the way. I think those are not owner occupied, but those are fee simple owned properties. Then you have the apartments across the street. My best guess is they're probably anywhere from, 1,000 to 1,200, which seems to be the norm for pricing of apartment. This will be a little bit different because it is a commercial district mixed use type of situation, but.
Okay. I don't think I really got an answer out of that, but that's okay. It's fine. Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Ravenmark?
Just anytime the city, in my history up here, has been able to rezone something from CS to anything else, we always jumped at the opportunity because CS is fairly intensive use. A lot of things are allowed in CS that maybe don't go with that neighborhood. And the other thing is the Wrightsville Avenue card overlay was kind of, it was born out of kind of a knee-jerk reaction back in the 80s when there was a couple of developers that were buying up 2 houses here and they were building strip centers all up and down. So they put a stop to it. So you could only have one 3,000 square foot footprint. And I think that this is a very good use of the special use permit to let this be 4,000 feet. So this is a win-win.
Anybody else? Yes, sir, Mr. O'Grady.
I was by there today, and this is going to be a big improvement.
Sure is.
Okay, very good. All right, I'm going to close the public hearing and ask for the wishes of council in respect to item PH3A first, and whoever makes the motion must read a consistent statement for the record. Sir, Mr. Barnett?
Yes.
It's made the motion. Mr. O'Grady is seconded.
A second.
Okay. Mr. Barnett, will you please read for
I move to approve the proposed amendment to rezone property located at 2323 Wrightsville Avenue to form CS Commercial Services to CBCD Community Business Conditional District in the Wrightsville Avenue Corridor Overlay to allow 4,000 square feet of commercial space and a maximum of 5 residential units, and finding to be consistent with the relevant policies in the comprehensive plan, based on the application materials and the information provided at the public hearing and in the staff report. And divine approval of the rezoning request is reasonable and in the public interest for the following reasons. The proposed rezoning would provide neighborhood scale commercial uses that generate minimal amounts of vehicular traffic and complements and enhance adjacent neighborhoods. I'm sorry. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
I'm sorry.
Okay. All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That item passes unanimously on first reading. Is there a motion to waive the second reading? Motion made by Mr. Ravenmark, second by Mr. Anderson. Discussion. All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That item passes unanimously on first as well as second reading. Now, let's go to item PH3B, which is allowing for the structure to be over the 3,000 square feet. What are the wishes of council in respect to item PH3B? We have a motion made by Mr. Ravenmark, second by Mayor Pro Tem. Discussion. All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? That item passes unanimously. Congratulations, and I know you'll do a good job. Thank you. Our next item of business is ordinances. We have 01, which is an ordinance modifying an existing O&I 1 CD office and institutional conditional district located at 3380 and 3400 Masonboro Loop Road to allow for alternative building elevation, site layout, and outdoor amplification restrictions. This was heard at our last city council meeting, so we had to bring it back for a second reading. I don't believe there's any other additional information that's been brought forward to us. Are there any other questions from council? If not, what are the wishes of council?
Move the item.
Motion made by Mr. O'Grady to move the item.
Second.
Second by Mr. Barnett. Discussion. All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That item passes unanimously. This brings us to the next item, which is item 02, which is also heard at our last city council meeting and also has to be heard for a second reading, which is an ordinance modifying an existing CBCD Community Business Conditional District located at 400 Arboretum Drive for a mixed-use development to allow spas and health clubs as a permitted use. I don't believe, again, there's any additional information, so I'd just like to ask, what are the wishes of council in respect to item O2? Motion made by Mr. O'Grady, second by Mr. Barnett. Discussion. All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That item passes unanimously. This concludes this agenda. Are there any items brought forward by our city manager? Our city attorney? Okay, our city clerk? Mr. Spears? Mr. Anderson? Mr. Avonbar?
I was hoping Kevin or Clifford was yesterday at 3 o'clock on CBS News, Lenny Simpson, who has ramrodded this thing for so many years, the Althea and Arthur documentary. And if you didn't see it, I recorded it. It is excellent. It's really puts, I mean, it mentions Wilmington a lot of local shots, people in it. So it was very good. And I hope everybody gets a chance to see it. And I failed last time to bring up my littering deal, but I wish somebody would call me that litters and tell me why they do that. You know, I just like to hear somebody that litters tell me why they throw trash out of their car. Please don't litter.
Mr. Barnett?
Yes, I agree with you with Mr. Lenny and the kids for the One Love Tennis. And they're also doing something different too, something else. He's having like a giveaway, food, this Saturday on the 12th. To give away food, and he's really helping and being a part of the neighborhood. So I'm excited about that. I want to remind people to continue to fill out your census. It ends this month, September 30th. And again, as I said before, you lose money for 10 years, not just 1 year, but for 10 years. And then I encourage everyone to register to vote. I actually got my absentee ballot today in the mail. So I was really excited about that. So please make sure you guys do that.
Thank you. Mr. Grady?
It's nice to see the gang back together.
You lost some, no, you lost some weight. Mayor Pro Tem? Just one last thing. You know, we had a big introduction last week with the naming of Wilmington as being the first World War II heritage city in America. And I just want to say a big thank you to Wilbur Jones, Captain Wilbur Jones, who for many years has touted this recognition. And this odyssey took place over 12 years ago, and it was a bipartisan effort. And to give you an idea of how nice it was, I think, almost a unanimous vote in the House and Senate. It was very close. It was over 90% support of it. But to have the president here to make the announcement and to be recognized as that first city, a lot of that goes to Wilbur and all of his hard work in getting it done, and just thanking our federal delegation for all their work, and Congressman Rouser and Congressman Tillis and Congressman Burr for helping us, and former Congressman McIntyre, who also helped and started this whole endeavor. But it was a nice announcement. With that, thank you for taking an interest in coming. We stand adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney. Hey, Joe, you could do it.
There are songs to be sung, bells to be rung, and a wonderful fling to be flung. And even when I'm old and gray, I'm gonna feel the way I do today, 'cause you make me feel so